save the world. Together we are invincible. Save the world from wars. Save the world from breaking apart. Save us from losing our hearts. Save us from losing our souls. Save us from losing our souls. Save the world. Save the world from wars. Save the world
Check,
from
check.
Save us from losing our hearts. Save us from losing our souls. Together we can save the world. Together we are invincible. Save the world from wars. Save the world from breaking apart. Save us from losing our hearts. Save us from losing our souls. Save us
Hello, hello, hello. Thanks for joining me. I'm glad you guys took the time to take advantage of the situation that we're all in right now, to share some knowledge, and hopefully you can learn some tips and tricks. I like to think of myself as a advanced user, but I still learn tricks from others when I get together on some shows. So I'm always learning. If you have something you want to share, it's great if you can share with the community as well. The main, I guess, reason for this is our industry is hurting right now because of the quarantine that has taken effect. I think it's still possible to get your clients to broadcast their shows. I will be sharing some of those techniques also, how I use Resolume into a software such as Wirecast or vMix or OBS, and how you can use Resolume as a playback and for routing. I see a lot of TV shows now that they're taking advantage of streaming from their houses. Oprah's got her streams where she's FaceTiming friends and sharing their stories. There is me and my wife, we watched The Walking Dead. We watched a new episode last night, and after that there is something called Dead Talk, and they talk about the shows. And what they did last night was they put a quad of speakers with the actors, and they talked about the show. So there's ways to get your message out there still. Even if you're a client or if you're helping out a client, you can try to address that with them, because some of these businesses their income has slowed down as well, and they would still like to get the message out, so we can help them still. I'm going to go over sharing techniques, some hardware specs, along with hardware configurations. I'll probably group those two together, the specs with the configurations. I'll go over the interface of Arena, the basic functions, along with how you can capture inputs and outputs, and what protocols you can use to get them into additional software. I'll show you, I guess, let's start with what you can achieve from, let's see, let me I've got like 3 computers in front of me, so bear with me. It's almost like a show. I'm going to switch over to my MacBook, and I'm going to show you, I'll show you some pictures of what is achieved with Resolume. Just some shows, LED screens. This show right here has 3 4K outputs. This is another picture of the same show. I'll go over how the outputs sync together, the hardware that I use, the output cards. I'll show you, how you can have fun on the job. This is a 3D cube raster that I made just to mess with the LED tech. Everybody thought it was pretty cool. This, actually, just playing around with this, I picked up some work from this, some content creation from this client, so it worked out for me pretty well. Just just playing around. This didn't take me too long. I have a cube wall pack that I produced, and I kind of just threw the raster on top of it, and it came out with a good effect. I'll give you some tips also how you see how this cube is coming out of the side here. I like to constrain all my content to the screen, so nothing runs off the screen, and it pulls off a 3D effect well. And if you design your content for that resolution and that screen, it's a wow factor. There's a couple other shows. This is an installation that was achieved with Arena. This was for the University of Miami. Me and my buddy Geronimo and Midtown put this show together. This was a 12 projector setup off of one Arena server. It's a rotunda room. There's 360 viewing, floor projection, a couple of statues. There's input cards for Apple TV. There's an Xbox. These guys go in there and play Madden with this. So this was a fun project. It was a little challenging. The whole project runs off of one server, like I said. That includes LED lighting. So there were a lot of letters for all their. This is the Hall of Fame hallway that is running off the same server, and we incorporated LED lighting into it. Here's another shot. And just some more shots. Here's a picture of one of the statues of the shoe. This is a picture of the player, how you're able to warp graphics around a 3D structure. Here's another shot. This is without the player lit up. So these are just white walls, and the effects are coming all from the content. So it's all about the content once you get everything mapped and routed. I think these all came out pretty great. This is a full raster across the whole room. There's 5 projectors hitting the floor, and there's four or 5 projectors hitting the walls. There's also a fog screen at the end of the hallway. As they're walking down that hallway, there's a story on the fog screen, and it shows a little video for them as they're going into it. Here's some live video of the playback. This server is running great, 60 frames per second. It's all about the configuration of your hardware. So you can have a top-of-the-line i9 processor, and if you do not configure your build correctly, you're going to bottleneck some of the components, and you will run into stutters. And I'll go over how we can avoid that together. Here's the LED lighting. LED lighting, I created a little raster inside the composition. There's a layer for lighting, so all they really have to do is open up After Effects and animate what they want to do the lighting. So there's really no lighting programming. This is just a video running across the LED bars for the letters also, and it's a pretty cool effect. You can do some pretty interesting effects with lighting alone. Let's go to the hardware. So I've seen a lot of configurations. There's a lot of information on the internet. There is information that is not always facts. Sometimes, I've done it in the past. I've believed something, and I've put out information that was incorrect. And once it's on the web, someone sees it, they share it, and it just gets spread around. So the best resource for getting your information is for instance, let's go to let me switch back over to another machine here. I'm going to go into, let's go into this machine here. I'm just going to open up a web browser really quick. The best resource, like say you want to know about display ports, go into your web browser, type in display port, and if you do not use DuckDuckGo, I recommend it. There's no ads. You can turn the ads off. It's a very clean search. You get a lot of the clutter eliminated. So if I type in DisplayPort, it'll give you a rundown on the right-hand side right here what a DisplayPort is. If you go to the wiki page, this is where you should get your resources. This will tell you everything there is about the DisplayPort, all the standards, all the versions that they've gone through, the versions that are coming up. 2.0 was announced in 2016. It was supposed to be launched in 17. They pushed it to 19. They released it, the standard, in 19. And the product should be incorporating, they should be incorporating late 2020. So this should be coming up. 2.0 is huge. You're going to be able to send down one line. It will be capable of sending 16K resolutions at 60 hertz or 10K at 60. You can do dual displays through 8K at 120, 4K at 144, triple displays at 10K at 60, and so on. This shows you all of the transmission modes. There are a bunch of different transmission modes, and this relies on the bandwidth that you can get through a cable. So if you have questions about cables, go to this link. They show you all the cable lengths, the type of connectors. They'll give you a pinout layout for all these connectors as well. So this great resource. Same thing if you wanted to go to, look up HDMI. So if you wanted to search HDMI, it'll give you the same results. You got on the right hand side, you got the HDMI information. Go to the wiki page, and it will show you everything about HDMI, the pin layout, all the standards, all the connection types. There's mini HDMI. There's all the different versions. 2.1 has been announced. This will do 10K at 120. This is exciting also. We should start seeing this pretty soon. The thing that's keeping us from sending all of this information out is the hardware that's being integrated into. Right now, say I wanted to get an 8K output out of one of my output cards, I would have to either send that to something that can accept an 8K resolution. And there's minimal hardware available right now that can capture 8K resolutions. The new cards that were just released, the RTX lineup, they will do 8K at 60, so it will do 8K by 8K at 60. There's not a lot of hardware that's going to accept that. One of the pieces of hardware that I stand by is Datapath. They have the FX4 lineup. There's an HX4. They have an SDI version. Let's go to, let me show you what the Datapath I'm talking about. Yeah, I've got a lot of keyboards in front of me. So let's just do Datapath FX4 here. This should bring you right to their site. This is how I get a lot of outputs out of these cards. I use a single output card on the servers that I build, either for installations or for running shows for corporate events or concerts. This is great hardware. You can send a 4K input into this box, and it will split it up to 4. If you're doing 4K, you can get 1920 by 1200 resolution out of these. I prefer the DisplayPort version of this box because you can convert DisplayPort to HDMI. You cannot convert HDMI to DisplayPort. There's an STI version, which is nice also. That's what I used for University of Miami. All the projectors were STI, so I just went straight into the projectors from the FX4s. Usually my workflow on a corporate event, there's usually a final output after my media servers. And the final output will either be coming from a Barco system, analog way. There's a couple other methods. Usually it's an E2 or an S3 is what I prefer. I have a couple of good friends that own the hardware, and it is a beast. If you're doing iMag, that's what I recommend. You can put capture cards on your servers, and you can capture inputs. You're going to get a little bit of latency with those capture cards. Datapath has a capture card, and you can get down to one frame with their capture cards. You have to pay for it, though. They are the most expensive capture cards on the market. Blackmagic has capture cards. I like Blackmagic. It seems users and operators have a love-hate relationship with Blackmagic, just like any other hardware. I've never had anything fail on me. I take really good care of my hardware. I place it into a container that's padded. I've seen guys badmouth Blackmagic on site, and then they just throw their hardware into a box, and of course that could possibly lead to damage. I'm not saying it is, but it's not contributing. That's something that I would be aware of. AJA is another brand that I like. If you go to Resolume's website, if you just type in, let's see, Resolume capture cards, I see a lot of posts on Facebook, and they're asking, what cards do you recommend? Go onto DuckDuckGo and just type it in, and you're going to get the information directly from the developer of this software. These guys know what they're talking about. They developed the software. I would go by their recommendations. There are native capture support cards. It'll say right here, we support capture devices from Blackmagic, Datapath, AJA. And it'll tell you what native support is. So what they're basically doing is they're utilizing the SDK for these cards, and it's capturing it straight for GPU use. There's another method that some of these cards, like this card I have, these are good little cards. They're not supported. So this is an Elgato HD60S. It's a Type-C card, HDMI, not supported by Resolume. I have good luck with them. They work. They do not work on a Mac machine, unfortunately, but on a Windows machine, they've been good to me. And I've never had issues with connecting up to three cards into one server, all through USB or Type-C. Using a USB card, you will have more latency. And that all comes down to what CPU you have and your hardware configuration. If you have an i9 processor that has a lot of bandwidth, you will notice less lag. If it's a PCI card and it goes directly onto your motherboard, you will have less lag. So your hardware is going to play a factor on your inputs as far as latency goes, resolution. Magwell, however you pronounce it, Chinese company. It's very popular, like they say here. It works. I have them. I use them. They get a little warm. I have to put heat sinks on my capture cards because I'm afraid to use them on a table without a heat sink. They get super, super hot. I've got a couple to where I could not even touch them. Here, I'll show you a shot. This is, just a simple modification. Got some heat sinks, strapped it onto a capture card. This is the USB version. Great card, gets warm. This helps it a lot. So you can you can get away with using these out in the sunlight. You might have to modify these a little bit. These are around $300 US. They do 1080 at 60. I think they go up to 20, almost a 2K resolution. It's a square box though. So that's capture cards. I build servers. I build them for clients, installations. I offer them. People reach out to me and ask me to build them servers that they can use on touring. And I pretty much, I would say 80% of the time, people opt for the Blackmagic cards. There is a new version of Blackmagic. It does 4K at 60 with 4 inputs simultaneously. It's a great card. It has less lag than the links that I have, the Duo links. So those are around $600. They've been great to me. The thing with Blackmagic, Resolume will pretty much automatically detect your input source, so it will grab the correct refresh rate and resolution. If you're using other software, you may run into an issue where it does not grab the correct resolution. So it's important to know your video signal. It's very important. If you're a video engineer, a playback tech, a VJ, a media server operator, it's very important to know your video signal. It saves you a lot of time, for one, on shows, and if you're using a signal that you're not getting high quality out of, it's not going to make your show look great. There's different cables and bandwidths that send out more information through the line to give you a cleaner picture. For instance, let's go into here. Let me minimize these really quick here. If you go into your NVIDIA control panel, I have a 2080 Ti card in this server. This is my studio server I use for testing. And if you go to, let's see, it's adjust image. No, I'm sorry, change resolution. So if you look at the monitor, I have a 2K monitor. Refresh rate is 144 hertz. If you've noticed, sometimes you've come into an issue where you're on an LED wall and you want to go black, and instead of the LED wall going black, it goes gray, and there's no way to get a true black out of it. So this comes into your routing, your output, your color depth. This is all important information. If I use the NVIDIA color settings, if it's unlimited, it's going to limit your range of your blacks. I believe it's 15. It'll say it right down here. 16 to 235. Full range will go 0 to 255. So that will give you your true blacks on an LED wall. You may not notice it on a projector as much, unless the projector is set to a mode. Some of these new laser projectors, I find when you go black, you can set the projector to turn off the lamp. So it eliminates the light output from the projector, so you don't get that bleed when you're sitting on black and the room's dark. You don't see the blend overlapping as well. So that's one critical information to know, that you should at least know for outputting on your end. A lot of times the LED tech does not communicate with the VJ or the media server operator. It's good, just go up to them, start talking to them, get to know them, make friends. You'll find out that there's great opportunities to work together and make the show look better. So I think I'm going to dig into, let me show you a couple of the servers first. I'll go over here and show you some PC builds. I am a fan of water pumps. I see a lot of misinformation on the internet saying Do not use water pumps for touring if your rigs are on the road, if they're rack mounted and you're putting them in a truck. Damage can happen. If you used a closed loop, an AIO closed loop, something that's not a custom build, these are crimped from the manufacturer. They even ship them themselves on airplanes and trucks when you purchase them. So these are safe to transport. I like Corsair. The issue with air coolers, let me see if I can find a shot here. This is an air cooler. You can see how tall they are and how much weight that could possibly be on top of your CPU. So if you're on the road and it's getting impacted, from the left and the right, and the guy is taking your gear off the truck and he's pushing it in and hitting all the speed bumps on the way, this thing is gonna move. It's going to be top heavy. It's going to wiggle back and forth. That is going to decrease the life of your motherboard for your connections, your pins on the underside of your motherboard. And having an AIO pump eliminates a lot of the weight. Here is, you can see the size of the pump. It's very small. This is a closed loop. This is the H100, I believe, and this server that I built for a client. Here's a top-down shot. So this thing is secured on here. There's very little movement that can happen. The tubing is not going to get punctured if you cable manage everything correctly to where it's not rubbing against something sharp. Moving on to RAM, it's all about your use case for RAM. So you can have 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is usable for shows. If you're doing playback, I use a lot of my servers for content creation as well. And I use other real-time generative content applications such as Touch Designer that uses more RAM than other softwares. Even Resolume, the more RAM you have, I believe the more recording time you can utilize if you're using the record function in there. PNG files, I believe, use up RAM also. I may be wrong on that. If I am, please let me know. But I believe that still images will utilize your RAM as well. This build right here is an i9 9900K. I clocked these at 5 gigahertz to an overclock. They easily hit 5 gigahertz with this motherboard. This is an MSI Ace Edge, I believe, motherboard. There are 3 available M.2 slots. One has a cooler on it, and I purchase, these heat sinks are a couple dollars. You can get them from Amazon, and you can band them onto the other 2 cards for dissipating the heat better. 3 cards. I like 3 cards. I use one M.2 for the operating system, and I have 2 show drives for playback. Some of these resolutions, when you get into the Datapath outputs, and say you have a Datapath, you can get 2 Datapaths out of one line coming out of an RTX card. I believe the 2060 series has a different resolution limit. I know the 2080s and the 2080 Ti's will do 7680 by 4320 at 60. So you can push that 8K resolution into one data path and then push it. You can loop out of that data path into another data path. So you can have 8 outputs coming out of one of your outputs on an RTX card. I'll show you a diagram after after we go a little bit more of this picture here. So having two drives for content, say you have a show that's 20,000 pixels wide and you need to play 3 layers of content. You can get close to your bandwidth limit running some graphics at that resolution. So splitting up the content between 2 drives is great for that reason. It's also good for a backup reason. So you can duplicate your show onto another drive. If one of your drives are going to fail, then you can have a backup file to boot off your other drive. And that having a backup on your shows is, it makes you able to breathe a lot easier. You got less stress on yourself. If something does happen, God forbid, hardware fails, you have your safety to where you can switch to a backup and continue the show. It may go dark for however fast you can switch. Learn your method of switching quickly. Be prepared for it. Keep that in mind when you're on your show. If you need to switch to a backup machine, I usually run 2 servers in sync to an E2, and the backup switch is usually coming from the E2 operator. So if one machine is, it's going dark for some reason due to hardware failure or a corrupt file, he's got the ability to, on a trigger just to go to your backup machine. And it's great when you trigger them in sync. You can use OSC for triggering that. We will get into that also. I'll show you how to sync 2 computers. This is the configuration I use for the radiator. It's a push-pull fan configuration. So you're pushing air into the radiator and pulling it out. The air that is coming out goes across those other components that are in this chassis, and you have your exhaust out the back, exhausting the heat. So everything is flowing through this chassis, a push-pull configuration. Here is, this is my workbench where I built some of my servers. This is a package that I put together for someone. This is a hardware that I use, the H100s. You can see all the M.2 drives there for redundancy. The coarse air products for the RAM and the motherboards. It is the Z390 Ace motherboard. That is what I use a majority of the time. They're great motherboards. There is another motherboard that I like. It's more expensive, but I'm not a fan of the BIOS system in it. There's been issues with it. I know the MSI works, and that's what I choose to go with. Here's another shot. Here's some i9s, motherboards, some 2080 Ti's. This is the back of the server. This has the new DeckLink card in it. This is the I/O panel for the motherboard. Very clean look. Using a 2080 Ti card, a capture card, those M.2s, I am pushing under full load around 450 watts. So the power supply, this has an 850 in it. This has a little bit less load than the max that I've seen. So my rule of thumb is whatever your max load is going to be with your components, get a power supply that is double, that will accommodate for double the power. This will give you longevity on your power supply also. If you're running your power supplies at 70% all the time, they're going to get hotter. The power supplies, the wattage that I use, the fans never turn on because they're drawing little power. This is a new chassis that I'm using. This is a Rosewheel chassis. I've talked to the manufacturer, and I used a 4300 in the past. Let me see if I have an image. This is the new one. The new chassis has USB 3 inputs on the front, and it has the ability to get your front bay mounts in cleaner. I fabricate these from the manufacturer. I take them and I will gut them out somewhat. I paint the back of them black, and I make it so I can get the cooler up in front of the chassis to get the coldest air possible. Here's another piece of hardware. This has a 2080 Ti, the DeckLink 8 Duo, or yeah, I think it's the 8 link. So you can have 8 additional outputs or inputs through SDI as capture inputs. It's just some servers going out. This shows the fans, how they blow across the rest of the configuration, the components. I use LEDs on the fans. They are linked to the software from the motherboard. So this will give you a live readout of your temperature. You can link it to the CPU or the GPU. Resolume doesn't use a lot of CPU if you have all your codecs with their DXV3. That is running all off your graphics card, so it depends on what you're utilizing from your machine. This is an X99 build. This is an older build. It has a 2080 Ti in it also. The key is to, if you're building or you're getting into building a server, cable management is key for me. I've opened up someone else's server that's been built by another, and the cables were stuck in the fan blades. So the fan wasn't turning. So if these are on the road, you want, if it's possible getting moved around or pushed, you just make sure everything's secure in there. This also, having everything cable managed clean like this, gives you more airflow going through your chassis, so everything stays cooler, and that's better for hardware always. Okay. Let me see what else we have here. I've got some shows here. This is 20 outputs I did with United Projections and IAV. This was a fun show. The content was amazing. The client was super happy. Here's another shot. I think I have a video of the playback, possibly. Let's see, it's LEDs. This might be some playback. This was 20 individual outputs from one of these servers. And it's the same video for this playback, but the content creator, the producer of the show, she designed everyone's name on the tables for their plates. They put their passports on the tables, and everyone had their own name. And it was, when everyone saw that, they went ballistic. You could hear it in the room. It was really great. It was a nice touch. So having the ability to assign all your outputs individually, you can customize your show very, very nicely. Let's see what else I have in here. This is the Temple House in Miami. This is a great space if you're in Miami. And if you're looking to put your clients into a space, definitely check out this space. All these walls are white, and it's a 360 immersive environment to where you can, for this show specifically, this was for Ferrari. They did an F8 launch, and you could see all the walls are branded with their content. So the ceiling, all the walls are running off of one media server in this space also. Great space. Look it up. Go to their website. You'll see some great content there. So that's show and tell for some of my hardware. Let me just go over one more thing with this Datapath. So I was saying you can get an 8K input into this out of one output. So the way that they did this, if you go down to user guides, find out more. I believe this is the right section. And FX4 user guide. Let's see. Multiple devices. This should be it. Let me make this a little larger for everyone so you can see this. So if you want to use this right here, this is it. So you have an 8K output coming out of your server right here. You're going into your Datapath, and it's splitting up that 8K input across two data paths. So you're looping out of this data path into the next data path. So this FX4 is receiving a 4K resolution, and you can do this as a quad. The Wall Designer software will let you do it as 7680 by 1080. When you have two of them, you're going to have 7680 by 2160. So this will be under here. So you have eight outputs out of one of your outputs on a card that is capable of pushing that resolution. So that's how I'm able to have up to 24 outputs off of one 2080 Ti card. 2080 card will handle it. 2080 Ti gives me a little bit more headroom. I like my cards running a little bit cooler, and I like having the power if I'm rendering content outside of Arena or Resolume or Avenue. So 1 8K, if you have 6 of these, you have 24 outputs. These are somewhat expensive. If you go to B&H and you type in FX4, I think they're around $1,800, $1,900 right now. I recommend the DisplayPort version. I think the HDMI is the same price. Unless you have a need for HDMI specifically for your use case, then you can opt for the HDMI version. There's an SDI option also. I believe the SDI option is around $2,000 US right now. There's another way to distribute your 4K output to multiple screens as well. I have one here. You can use this, the AJA, the HOP5 4K. This takes a 4K input, and it will push out to 4 SDIs. So out of one output out of your server, you can get 4 outputs here. They're SDI. They don't make an HDMI version. You can convert. These are locked together when they're coming out. So if you have 4 screens and you want to do a blend, you can use one 4K output right here. The data paths, when you have multiple data paths, let's talk about the sync output issues. I've seen a lot of talk about syncing outputs out of a regular RTX card. It's been mentioned that you need a Quadro card to sync all your outputs. Again, look up your resources online, go to the manufacturer's website and look up the information. You may have to dig into the specs of the product to find it. Sometimes they just give you the basic specs, but they are there. They give you all the information about this. With this particular card, the FX4, when you put one input into this card, it will lock these 4 outputs together. So you can do blends with projection or LED walls is where you'll really notice tearing if you have issues with your outputs not syncing up. When you output out of this loop into another data path, it locks both of those data paths together. So it goes off of the input, off the first input that you put into this. When you have 3 sets, so if you have 6 data paths, and like that table projection, they were all separate screens, so it wasn't necessary it wasn't a blend. It wasn't necessary to sync them together. No one would notice a millisecond off. The outputs that come out of the RTX cards are synced together. There's no issues running blends straight from the card for LED screens. You do not need a Quadro card. I've seen a lot of misinformation on it. The Quadro cards are great when you have more than one graphics card in your server. Then you can sync both of those cards together. You will need a sync card as well that locks those two cards together, and that's something that you can put inside on the PCI. There's variables that come into play for sync issues. When you get screen tearing, it could be contributed due to cabling, anything after the output that's coming out of your server. So if it's going into another piece of hardware and converting the signal, as long as your outputs are similar and they're all the same bandwidth. So if you have all the DisplayPort outputs, the cards that I use are 2080 Ti's. You know, these. I like the NVIDIA, the Founders Edition. One, for the size of the card, it fits nice inside of the chassis. It's smaller than some of the other releases. Everyone, EVGA, they all use the same chipset. What they do is they use a different BIOS. They overclock them a little bit more. They put bigger cooling systems on them. But I like for my needs, this card. I'm not trying to get, I'm not doing gaming across 4K monitors. That's utilizing, like a game like Battlefield. I think they show Battlefield 5 on here, which I'm a fan of, but that's not what I use for shows. So this card is plenty of power. They are synced outputs. This card has the benefit of having 3 display ports out. Let me see, go into specs here. This is the right resource to look at. Go into specs and you will see display support. You will have DisplayPort, HDMI, and USB-C. This particular card has 3 display ports. So if you use those 3 display ports with identical cable lengths, you will not have any syncing issues. I have not run into that issue if you configure everything correctly. Now, if you're going to use a display port and you're trying to sync it up with an HDMI output, say you're sending 2 outputs to an E2, you're going to get some sync issues between these 2 outputs here, or USB-C. There's the cabling's different, the bandwidth is different, so it's not going to be identical. So as long as your cards have 3 display ports out, you can use that FX4 setup that I was talking about, where you can use up to 6 FX4s. HDMI used for your GUI. That's going to be your user interface for Arena. I've run these systems 3 8K outputs and a 4K GUI, hitting 60 frames solid. It doesn't even dip down to 59 frames. It stays at 60 frames solid. So having the correct configuration, something that will push these outputs to your E2 or your analog way will make your show look great also. So the 2080 Ti is my go-to. 2080 is nice. The thing with the Macs, let's talk about the MacBooks. They're great computers. I use a MacBook. That is my personal driving machine. I use them for shows, for playback, up to a certain extent. They do not support NVIDIA cards anymore. There used to be a way to get the NVIDIA cards on an older operating system. If you're running the latest operating system, you have to use an AMD card. So there's pros and cons to both systems. I'm a fan of Windows. I'm a fan of OS X. There's the MacBook, the Mac OS is very reliable for playback. It's not very powerful because of the graphics card. I have the i9 MacBook Pro here next to me. It's got the 5500M series card in it, and it runs, a couple 4K outputs fine. It depends on what you're playing back. If you're using a lot of effects, that's where your CPU will come into play also. But it runs it fine. But if you want to get up into 8K resolutions, you're going to need a more powerful card, and then you're going to have to go to a PC platform to get that card able and supported, a driver for that card inside of the PC. I believe the MacBooks and the Macs are more stable with software because the Mac world, it's sandboxed to their hardware. So they don't have to support, like Dell, HP, where they have all these different drivers for all these different components. The hardware that they sell inside of their systems is the OS is specifically made for it. And they support AMD right now. So I'm running this MacBook off of, I'll switch back over to it. This is coming off of an eGPU. I went with an AMD. So this is running a 5700 XT. And that's where my outputs are coming out of. I've used this with Arena using an eGPU, and it works fabulous. This card is very powerful. It's about a $400 card. There's a big noticeable difference from the card that's inside the MacBook Pro. And using an eGPU keeps the heat down from the graphics card that's inside. So if you prefer all your power to the eGPU, there's an option to do that in the Mac. It'll keep your system cooler. So that's great if you're traveling overseas. In my case, sometimes I just need 2 4K outputs or 3 4K outputs, but I want a very reliable system that's powerful enough. So I'll bring a little eGPU with me, carry on with the MacBook Pro, and I can run that show straight from an eGPU. The Mac side is great. You can use the internal monitor display. I've seen no difference. I've done testing to where you can use that monitor and just use the card as the outputs. Now, I've used 2080 Ti cards on this Mac also under Windows. So I'll dual boot it, and I'll use Boot Camp. And with the 2080 Ti card, it's a beast. It's nice to have that much power, but if I need that much power, I can achieve what I need out of the Mac side. So I don't use the Windows side for shows anymore with the MacBooks. I use my rack mounts. I'll bring my big boys. I'll bring the big guns out. The eGPU, the thing with the drivers, it's like, again, it's a pros and cons. You have the AMD that works great on the Mac side, but when I tried to dual boot it to the Windows side, I can't get this AMD card to be recognized in Windows. And the same thing with the NVIDIA card. If I boot it up into Windows, it sees the card, but I can't get that card to work in Mac. So it's it's like the catch-22 where you got to use one or the other, basically. There's a problem right now with the latest release of Windows with eGPUs and AMD cards. So they'll fix it, but I keep this Mac on the Mac side. The i9 processor. I don't bring the eGPU with me everywhere. I use it here in my studio. Like I said, it's good to have if you do need to go overseas. It's a benefit. But I use that MacBook just for content creation, single screens, double screens. Sometimes, most of the time, it's 1080 screens that I'm using this MacBook here. Let me just make sure my streams are still going here. I've been talking a lot. Everything looks like it is going good still. Yeah, I'm streaming to Facebook and YouTube. These will be archived. So If you missed this, you have a chance to, or if you have to leave, you can go back to it and view it again. Or if I went over something too fast, review it again. I'll take questions towards the end of the video. Seeing the chats go through here, I appreciate the conversation. I'm going to try and get through as much as I can and then answer some questions when I get to that point. And then I'm trying to keep this within an hour and a half total time. We'll see how far I can get through it. It may take a couple hours. I don't know. Again, if you can't stick around the whole thing, just you know, come back to it at a later time. I appreciate it. You know, this is knowledge that I want to share with you, help everyone out right now with a difficult time. And you can still use Arena in today's situation. Like right now, I'm using Arena. I'm feeding it into my Wirecast. So I have. Let me load up a different scene here. This is Arena that's running my backgrounds behind me. I have a green screen behind me, and I'm using some overlays. So inside of my web streaming software, I'm using Wirecast. I can do layers. I can put these layers on top of behind me. I can put the layers in front of me, so I can have lower thirds. This is all being routed through NDI capture, so I have no video outputs coming out of this server. This is all going through Ethernet into my streaming server. They're two separate machines because I'm going out through several providers to get the stream out. I decided to use another server for the stream. You can send them straight from one software to another if it's on the same machine as well. Same method. So the way I have this set up, let me switch over to an RTX. Let's do this. So this is Arena. We'll get into the interface now. I'll show you really quick how I have the streaming going with the lower thirds. This is my background. I have, if I go back over here, I have the galaxy scene with the world turning right there and the lower thirds. So I have some of my shows, most of them, I build 5 layers. If I don't use all 5 layers, that's fine. I have them there just in case I need them in the future. The great thing about Arena is it's very flexible. I'm a D3 operator also, so I am experienced with other media servers, and they all have their pros and cons. All of them are pretty powerful if they're configured correctly and you're using the correct codecs for playback. You can achieve a lot with any media server. Resolume is my go-to for a majority of my events. They've made this software, I've been using it for a long time, and they've made this software so flexible for me. I know you've all been on shows to where if it's your show, you're doing all the production, the designing, you're still going to get a curveball from the end client. Someone's going to say, oh, let's put a title on top of this, or can we put a pip of the PowerPoint off to the right or something like that. So with Resolume, I can do that very quickly. The client's amazed how fast I can get stuff on the screen, how I can transform and move the content around and manipulate the content with effects. The engine inside of Arena is running very well with these latest releases. I'm using 7.1.1, which was released. There were a couple fixes. I've seen, I go onto the Resolume page on Facebook, and I see angry people sometimes. Resolume's giving them a hard time. This is where the configuration for your hardware and your software Using the correct codecs, they make a huge difference. I've never had a showstopper using this software. All the way back to Resolume 4. I've never had a showstopper. I test my software. That's why I have a studio rig. I test it. I keep Windows up to date. I'm not afraid of updating my Windows, my graphics drivers. I do it on this machine first. I test it religiously, and I make sure that my workflow, that if there's a bug inside of my workflow, that I know a way to avoid it, or if you need to go back to a different version, very simple. Go to Resolume's website. Go to download, and you can, on the very bottom down here, it says Arena downloads. They have the versions prior to the latest releases in here, and I believe they're in order from what was released. So 6.1.5, they updated Arena 6. They fixed something that was given a couple people issues with that. And it goes, so if you have something with 0.1 that's giving you an issue and 7.1 didn't give you that issue, just install an older version if you definitely need to go with that workflow. Same thing with Avenue. There's Alley downloads. If you need the converter, this is where you get the converter from. Great tool. Saves me a lot of time. If you just need the codec to give to your client, say the client is handing off content to you, this is where you can send them the codec. You can either email it to them or direct them to this page. Try to go over the settings with them. There's a couple options to get depending on your encoding software, to get the alpha channel in there. There's a couple different options for bitrate. I think you can do a normal DXV and a high quality DXV. With and without alpha for both of those. So if you need the software, this is where you get it. You get it straight from the source. Always check their website. I personally don't have any issues with any of the releases that say, hey, I can't use this on a show. It's been great to me. I've seen the posts, and it just makes me wonder, how can I help someone figure this out? So I'll chime in every once in a while and say, try this. Some of these laptops, they give you issues because the components they're limited. So some of them have, these things with the graphics cards that, what was Optimus, I think was an issue with some of these graphics cards. And you had to go into the BIOS and disable Optimus. So there's going to be some issues with some of these laptops, but there's going to be a workaround a majority of the time to get it working correctly. That or just find a way around it. Find a new workflow. Try to make it happen a different way. You got a certain file that's giving you an issue. Use a separate playback machine. If you have that, I always carry around either QLab or another variety of a playback software if I need to send a video out other than Arena. But most of the time, I prefer going out of Arena because I can trigger the audio, the video. I can trigger lighting. Everything comes out of this server, and it's all off of one queue. So I hit my column, and it's playback. It makes everyone's job easier and more relaxed. So let's go over the interface. When you first open up Arena, let's just go to a new one here. We'll go over this rather quickly. There's a lot of information on their website for tutorials that can give you tricks and tips as well. But when you first open up Arena, let me reset my layout to default. This is what it will look like. So it starts off with 3 layers. You've got a program output, a preview output. You've got 2 fields here, with one with a tab for layer and your composition. So think of this as your order of operation here. You have a clip that you're playing, which is on a layer, and then your composition is your whole output. So this is, you can say you have, let me just grab something here real quick. Say you have something like this. It's a, just some content here. Your composition has an opacity, for instance. If I can find it, here's your opacity. So this will bring down, say you have 3 or 4 things on different layers, and you want to bring down your whole output. You can easily just bring down your master. That you can go to black. You can size. There's transform operations. You can put effects on your final output, your composition. And there's a couple different methods for crossfader if you're using the AB function. Audio, you can dim down your complete audio. I've realized if you do bring down your master, you're going to bring down your audio master also. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to dim a screen with your master and you have audio that's coming out, your audio will be tuned down a little bit as well. You can do this on a layer basis to where you can put the effects on a layer. So everything on this layer will have that effect applied to it. Or you can do it on a clip basis to where you can put an effect or a transformation on a clip and it will just affect that one clip separately. There's an option in here to where you can grab these windows and you can rearrange them. So if you find a space in between the layout here, the windows, you can pull one out. So I have the 3. I'll show you how I like, everyone's got their own preference for their interface. This is how I like it. I like to see my composition, my layer, my clip. If I'm using groups, I like to go over here and show groups. Groups will be here, and you can put that in between so you can see all 4 panels here for you. I like my monitor on the right side. I put my sources, anything that's a short list, I put it underneath my my preview and my program. Anything that's a long list, I try to get the whole screen to show it. So usually effects and files, I'll put as tabs so I can cycle between these 2. I can see the whole list. So if you have a lot of content, you can easily find your content here also. Compositions I usually put with sources over here. So if I want my NDI servers or capture cards, you can see them on a short list, drag them into your clip over here. So this is pretty much my layout. Like I said, I usually use 5 layers, so I'll load up my previous composition here. Are you sure? I am sure. So this is usually my layout here, and I extend so I can see all my layers. I am just going to reload my, once you have your layout set here, you can go to view and you can save a layout, give it a name, and it will remember that layout. So any changes that you've made to your windows, your sizing, it should remember it. Even the additional views that you've added on, I like to have the statistics down here of the computer. If you go to show hardware stats under view, it will give you your statistics down here. It used to show your GPU, an additional GPU statistic. It had to be removed due to a complication with, I think it was a memory leak over time. It had it was a bug with it. So I don't need it. I like to see how much VRAM I'm using. I like to see how much RAM and CPU I'm using. That's important to me. If I need to view something, I can just go into my task manager here, excuse me, and I can see how much my GPU is using right here. So that's about 24% right now. This is with 3 NDI outputs, a couple other softwares running in the background. So this is my configuration for this machine. I've got the i9 9900K, 64 gigs of RAM. I have 2 SSD drives and 3 M.2 drives. Like I said, one is the operating system, 2 are show drives, and these 2 I use for content creation most of the time. Sometimes storage. When I'm using Adobe, After Effects, or Premiere, I use them as scratch disks, so I can scratch all my RAM to those disks as well. But yeah, this thing runs good. I have this one a little under 5 just to keep my studio a little cooler. So 4.9, this thing, almost 5, this thing runs great. This thing, you can see right here, the frame rate is just stuck at 60, and I can play, let me just play some footage here. This was the countdown, and you can see I'm stuck at 60. It doesn't even move from 60. It's solid. This is with 4 pieces. This content here is 6K content. So this is 5760 by 1080. These 2 Earth packs that I made. I'm playing 2 of them. Timer. This is a 4K clip, and I have alpha on these with, including the lower thirds also. So it plays it like a champ. If you configure your machines correctly, you will have some impressive playback. The frame rate for 60, by default under settings, this is going to be set to auto. And by having it to auto, your frame rate is going to go up to whatever your monitor refresh rate is. So this monitor is 144 hertz. So this goes up to 135 with my NDI outputs enabled. If I disable them, it goes up to 144. So there's a little bit of hit on it. There's little hardware on the market that does 120 hertz. I'm starting to see projectors now that hit 120 hertz. I am a fan of higher refresh rates, higher frames per second. When you have something that's moving really slow, rotating, such as these Earth scenes here, it's much smoother. So this content I made at 60 frames. Down here in the description, let me just make this screen a little smaller here. It says 60 frames per second. So all my content, my final output for this stream is 60 frames per second. So even though my monitor does 144, I'm going to lock it to 60. And that will save me, that'll give me a little headroom on the system. And I find it to be smoother playback if your frame rate matches your output. As soon as you plug in a monitor to your output, that automatic setting will detect the refresh rate of that monitor. So if you're having an issue where you can't get over 30 frames per second, and you have it set at auto, look at your refresh rates for your display outputs. You can usually find that in Windows under Display. And if you go to Advanced Display Settings, it will show you right here what your refresh rate is. If you need to change it, this option will bring open this window, and you can choose a screen refresh rate right here. So I can limit this screen to 60 hertz if I wanted to. I don't want to do that, but you can if you want to. So that's something to keep in mind if you're hitting 30 hertz or 30 frames per second. Check your final output to see if your output's set to 30 hertz. Sometimes, depending on the cable and the resolution, some cables, this is where the video signal research comes in handy. Some cables will limit your bandwidth to where you only can do 4K at 30 through some of these cables. Some cables do 4K at 60, some cables will do 4K at 120. Some DisplayPort cables do 8K, and there's cable lengths that play a factor into this. So I think the 8K, the recommendation for 8K, to get 8K out of a DisplayPort is 2 meters, or 6 feet, about 6 feet. So if you have a 6-foot cable and it's properly got the proper specifications for that cable, it will give you 8K at 60. So keep that in mind. Also, it could be hardware related. There's settings in NVIDIA and AMD control panels that have options for refresh rates also and frames per second. So let's get back into this interface. I have 6 layers here. The way I set up my shows, my workflow, and this is exactly how it looks. This layer, this content will cover this layer. This content will cover this layer. So if they're playing on top of each other, if you click on the name, it'll show you right here in your preview. It'll show you what's playing. That's how it's layered. So you can put elements on top of each other. And the way I like to build content is most of the time I like a system, or if I have to fade, for this instance, I have this screen here. Let me go to full screen here. Let's see here. Okay, so I have a layer of this dark world behind me on top of the same render that I did with it as a day version. So if I fade out the top layer, there we go. So if I fade out this top layer, you'll see that it's a seamless transition to a daytime scene. So I can trigger all these from the column view. So column 4 here, I triggered the column. It triggers both of these. Since these were identical frame rates, I made them, the exact same speed. I can turn this into a night version, and it's got a great effect. So you can be daytime, and then you can just slowly make it nighttime to where you have the the lights showing on the world. You can see the ozone layer a little bit. You can change them independently, so I can put a different background behind me if I wanted to. And then, if you want to do lower thirds or something, that's on a separate layer up front. The way this is going into my web streamer, you can route these layers to a specific slice or screen. Let me open up my advanced output and let me show you. So this is my advanced output. So this layer 6 that I have up here, I have it on, I named it top layer. It's going out NDI. So it's grabbing under the input source, I am grabbing layer 6. So this layer on top is on the top layer inside of my web streaming server. So this is in front of my camera, and then I have the background is going out NDI. And I have this set as a group here for these 5 layers. So I chose, if you rename these, the names will update. This is group 1. So for this group 1, I have it behind me. I've got layers behind me, so I've got 5 layers that I can control. And then I've got the lower thirds. So you can layer everything. My camera input is going straight to my web stream because I kind of always want that live, and while I'm showing you something in Arena right now. So your layering system you can use inside of your streaming server also. Streaming is big right now. Everyone's utilizing it. Everyone's quarantined. So this is a good opportunity to, to practice. If we're quarantined for longer, this is a good option. A lot of the streams that I've seen are very basic. It's a side-by-side photo or two videos that are side by side, and that's it. There's no frames, there's no overlays, there's no lower thirds. So with Arena, you can really make your web stream look nice. You have lots of options. You can bring your lower thirds in and out. Just playing back the animations on it. I can put smoke in front of me if I wanted to, which it's cool. As long as you have those alpha channels in there, you can overlay everything on top of in whatever order you have there. So it's very powerful. NDI works very well for me. That's the only outputs I have coming out of this server right now. I have NDI going out, 2 of them, and it works great. You can capture NDI also. So under your sources tab, you'll see NDI servers. I'm sorry if this is basic for you. I'm just trying to give everyone. There's some new users also that this might be new to them. NDI's a protocol that is it should be known, and it's something that you can take advantage of without getting capture cards. There's a little bit of compression to it. But it's usable for live events, corporate events, recordings. If you want that raw input as a recording, I suggest a capture card. But as you can see here, there's very little compression. Everything's pretty sharp. So yeah, these NDI servers will show up under your sources tab right here. So I'm sending out my whole composition, my background layer, and my top layer, and that's what my web streaming server is seeing also. I have another, I've got OBS running on my MacBook Pro here. Let me just open it up. Let's see, let's open up OBS. And then you'll see as soon as I open that up, it pops open right here. It says, CVH Visuals MacBook Pro 1, local OBS. My mic's probably in the way, but yeah, you can see it right there, OBS. So what I have here is, if you double click on it, it'll show it into the feed. I'll put it up here. It'll say offline for a second. It'll grab it, and then I can put it there to where right now I'm capturing the live chat from my MacBook Pro through OBS. So all the chat that's coming in, I can overlay into the web stream if I wanted to. That's one way of capturing a source from NDI. There's a lot of software is integrating NDI. There's hardware that's available now where you can get converters that convert NDI to, or HDMI to NDI. There's cameras that output NDI now. I've had the ability to stream 1080 feeds from one Ethernet cable. It's amazing. You can do audio also through NDI. You can grab tallies for cameras, camera control. There's a lot of possibilities with NDI. So it's a free open source protocol. You have to buy hardware if you're looking for converters, but the software is free. You can download it. Just type in NDI Tools. This will bring you to their website, NDI Tools. You can install this on the Mac and the PC. 4.5 just became available recently. There's a couple new additions, but you will get a studio monitor, a scan converter, The scan converter is awesome. When you put it on a Mac, you can open up the scan converter and you can choose, say you have Safari open, you can choose your Safari window only, and it will capture and crop everything just to that window for you. So only that window is coming over your NDI stream. You can do a virtual input. Experiment with these VLC plugins. There's mobile apps. I have a mobile app here. So let's go into, you can do this wirelessly, or you can do it wired is the way you want to go for a corporate event. If you're on a corporate event and you're wireless, there's audio transmissions, there's Wi-Fi from the event space. Everything could interfere with your connection, so try to go wired as much as you can. I am going to, let me see if I can get this working here. All right, so I'll show you, they make some of these apps you have to purchase, but there's an NDI app, and when I open it up, you'll see it pop up on my NDI server list here. I can drag it to the to a layer here, and then you can see a live view. This is wirelessly through my network in my studio. This is my view. This is coming from an iPhone, so this works good. It works good as gags. You can pull off some shots that you couldn't get otherwise really quickly, and it works great. I haven't had issues with it. If you have a good network, I haven't had issues with NDI. So that's just another example of an input. You can use Ethernet from your iPhone also. You can buy the dongles that go into the iPads, the iPhones, there's micro USB Ethernet adapters for other phones, and you can use those adapters to wire them onto the network also, which works great. We do some shows where the iPads are on stage and you've got to plug a dongle into it to get them Ethernet. That eliminates the issues with the Wi-Fi in the space. So all your sources will pop up on this side of your for NDI. If you have a capture card, I do not have one on this machine. Let me see if I can plug one in. Let's see if this thing will plug in or not. So there, I plugged in one of these little HD60s real quick. I am going to drag that onto my clip. It will give you the properties here. This card is not supported. I'm going to connect through HDMI, and let's see about the resolution here. So this card doesn't auto detect, so that's the only issue with this card, and it obviously is not working right now. So let me see what is going on with this. It's probably the refresh rate. So there we go. So that's where your knowledge of resolutions and refresh rates come in handy. This phone is outputting at 5994, 1080. So if I go live here, I can show you my screen. Let me see if I can get you with my output here. Okay, so let's switch this over, and I'll open up this screen on top. What did I do here? Maybe it's in the wrong clip. There we go. Okay, so you can see my phone now coming through a capture card. So it's capture card. I find latency on the NDI to be less than capture cards a majority of the time. It's, you know, it all comes down to your system also. The latency with this card is, you know, amazingly, it's not supported and it's not using the SDK, and I'm getting 2 frames latency out of this card. And this is a $70 card that I buy these renewed off of Amazon for $70. So I have a handful of these, and whenever I need to get an iPhone or an iPad into a portable system, or even, you know, a big rig, if I run out of, you know, inputs on a capture card, I've got additional inputs to where I can just USB them right into the server. So you can see how good it works. I can go back into, you can see the NDI app right there. That's the camera. So this is another way of getting your camera feed, and this is wired now into your system instead of going through a wireless network. So you're capturing it through a HDMI. But there's lots of apps on here that you can experiment with. You know, there's some of these guys make some cool interactive apps that you can use in some of your events. I've seen stuff where you can just touch the display and draw stuff on the walls, and it makes it you know, interactive basically. So that's how the capture cards work. They'll pop up on your source list also. I'm going to show you one more NDI method. When you install that toolkit, there's an option to install a plugin for After Effects. If you use After Effects for content creation, I think I'm going to have a different episode for content creation, but I'm just going to touch up on this because this is NDI related. So I use After Effects, Cinema 4D, Photoshop, Illustrator, you know, Touch Designer. I use, those are my main bread and butter softwares, my tools. When you install the NDI tool into your machine, so let's see, let's open up, let's do lower thirds here. So this is the lower thirds that I made for this project, this webinar. So I have a lower third that comes out here. What you can do with that plugin, if you go to edit preferences, it might be in a different spot on the Macs. You can open up your preferences and go to video preview, and there will be an NDI output straight from your After Effects. You have to enable the Mercury transmit right here, and then you can just enable your NDI output. Once you have that enabled, that source is going to show up over here in your source list as NDI. You can drag it onto a layer. Give it a second. Give it 2 seconds. Maybe I have to have it in the foreground for now. Let's see. Let's try and scrub through it. There it goes. So I've got a lot going through my network right now. I've got feeds. You know, I have a 10 gig switch in here, but there's still a lot going through here, and a couple of servers going out. So this live output from your timeline will show up, as you can see, in Arena in my program up there because I have it enabled. This is very useful if you have a raster that you can put inside of After Effects that shows your LED, your pixel mapping. You can create content, you know, very easily just by you can see I'm moving it around. It's moving around inside of Arena. So if you're projection mapping onto a structure, or if you're, you know, and you're not sure how the colors are going to look, and you want to do it live, or the shadows don't look right, you can feed After Effects straight to your Arena program over network. It doesn't have to be the same machine, and you can build on top of your structures live, which is super powerful. You don't know how many times in the past I've had to line up, like the windows on a building or something like that. You can make a 3D model and it just gets so close, but when you're on site, every little centimeter for me counts. I like everything to be very precise, so I can go into After Effects, open up my project, and line everything up precisely, and color it to where the color output looks nice on the projectors, and then I can render it out and use that as a playback file. So great tool. There is one caveat to this workflow, and that's the alpha channel. So even if I turn off, like the alpha background here on this, it still does not come through the latest version of Adobe After Effects. This is something I've reached out to NDI about, and what it turns out to be is After Effects used to use a certain plugin. It's the same one that it used two plugins. One was for After Effects and one was for Premiere. So it was an AEX plugin and then a PRM plugin. So now After Effects uses I believe it's the PRM. So it's something that Adobe has to correct on their end. It's nothing that NDI can do themselves. But if you can still layer inside of After Effects. Just work on your background and then build on top of it. Build your layers on top. So it's not like you can't build something. It's just if you're trying to overlay your NDI onto a background that's already there, which you can still do, just dim down your layer a little bit to let it peek through. So you can put your raster down here, use a different blend mode, and then you can see what's behind it. So that's NDI. That's capture devices. That's probably most of your input options and methods. There are a couple more, such as Siphon for the Mac side. There is Spout also. There's software that converts Spout to NDI and Siphon to NDI, and so you can transfer from Mac to PC. Might as well just use NDI from the scan converter on the Mac, which works great. I use OBS because I like to change sources, so I can build a bunch of scenes and then send those outputs out with just switching a scene in OBS. So that's pretty much the input and output side. We can go more into this interface here. I don't know how much time I'm coming up to an hour and 40 minutes here. Maybe I got 20 more minutes in me. I can go over a couple like play modes, a little bit more of the interface, and then I'll make another episode for content creation. And then we should be able to cover everything with another episode, so we can dig deeper into content. So let's go back with playback. We'll start that. Remember the four panels down here. There's a clip properties. There is. Let me just make this window a little larger. And I hope you guys can see my screen with the resolution. This is a 2K monitor. I scaled it up a little bit just to make it larger. If you full screen it on your device, you might be able to see what I'm doing. If you try to follow along, you'll definitely know what I'm talking about. The playback modes, there's a play, so you can play a clip that loops. Well, first you can play it forward, you can play it backwards, and then you can pause it. So we'll play it forward, and then there's options for playback mode. You can loop it, you can bounce it. Bounce goes to the end, and then it comes back to the beginning. It just keeps bouncing back and forth. Random shows you, a bunch of different jumps between those frames, and then there's speed options and your interval, and then the distance. So you can see how that timeline just kind of jumps around and goes back and forth. So if you play with these, you'll get some cool effects with some of your content. I'm going to leave it on play once and clear. So it plays this whole timeline. When it gets to the end, it will disappear. It will not hold the last frame. It will just go black. So 2, 1, and then it goes out. So if you set this to play once and hold, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's going to go to this clip. We are going to go all the way to the last, 8 or seconds or so here. It's going to go to the last frame, and it's going to hold that last frame. So if you have something that you want to play out and it stays on the holding slide, on the last slide, without your screens going black, that is going to be the option for that. There's a continue option and a relative option. Continue is pretty basic, pretty straightforward. You have your countdown. If you go off of it, it went down to 51. If I continue, it picks up right where it left off. There's another option for relative. This is powerful, especially if you use timecode. You can duplicate this clip. So I have 2 clips. This clip here, I will set to relative. So whatever is on this layer here, you can, if you start it with this clip here, since this is set to relative, this will pick up exactly where this one was going. So they'll stay in sync with each other. So this is powerful for time coding. If you have SMPTE coming into to control your clips, this is your backup right here. So you can have this as set as SMPTE. So when this receives your time code, it's going to trigger that clip, and this is going to stay synced with it also. So if this starts glitching around on you, you got a weak signal or something, you can just click on over to this clip and it will just play straight forward to it. And once you see that your signal is strong again, or if you feel safe enough to turn the SMPTE back on, just pick up back up on this one if you want to. So that's a great backup for SMPTE. It's something that's, that redundancy. You can have a backup on the same machine. You can have another machine as a backup. So those are the playback modes. There's blending modes for the layers. I'm not going to go into what each one does. Most of us are artists. We either use Photoshop or some kind of tool for creating content. And this is just like it sounds. It's an addition mode, an alpha mode, black and white. This is your blend mode when you turn this fader down from one to the next. So if I had these clips playing, these 2 world clips here, and I had this set to addition, when I bring this one down, it's going to get brighter at first and then go. You can see how it gets brighter. Let me just switch you back over here. It's going to get brighter right around the 50% mark, and then it's going to get dark. Compared to if you had it on alpha, it just fades out and it just fades in. So each blend mode is working off of the opacity there. There's options within the clip properties to where you can change it on a clip basis. So layer determined is whatever is on this layer, or you can have this clip just do their own blend mode on its own. Alpha type also. There is something that's missing on this interface. Let me load up my preset here. So this by default is not shown. This is your transition mode. This is the meter. This controls your seconds. The higher you get, the greater the seconds for a transition, for fades, or any type of transition, basically. There is an option in here to turn on show layer transition controls. So once you turn that on, this is going to pop up. It will also incorporate under layer right here. You will see duration. If you're like me and you want a 3-second without dragging the slider, you just type it in. You get a precise 3 seconds. 1 second is what I'm going to revert it to right now. There is a transition option here now. This is somewhat new. There are different options for the transition, like the blend modes now. So when you transition to another clip, this is what the transition is going to go to. So this is powerful when you want to transition, over to something. Like say I had alpha here, and I wanted it to zoom in. It zooms in, out to the. So that's That's just a basic transition right there. So that's powerful. There's other controls on here. You have columns under your interface. Since I grouped these 5 layers together, the easy way to do that is remove group, keep layers. So I will choose a layer. I will add a group, new. So this layer went into that group, and then I'm just going to drag the rest of these layers into a group. So everything that's under this layer or under this group, I can trigger independently from the whole composition. So I can trigger just this outside. So you can MIDI into these controls and trigger them independently if you don't want to change something up on top. There's another option to where this composition will trigger, it triggers your groups also. But if you don't want it to trigger, you can just go to ignore column trigger, and that won't trigger a layer if you don't want it triggered. So that's how I set up my scenes. I put everything into a column. I have everything ready for a show. Some shows have 100 columns, some have 200, some shows have 4. So it's it all depends on the show, but the way you set it up, if you have a clean setup and you have your MIDI device configured correctly to where these 2 options right here, you can link them to MIDI. You can just keep going to your next triggers right away. So it makes your life easy and more relaxable on a show. Let's turn down the audio on that, and you can just go next. Once your show is all organized. If you're VJing, you're going to be skipping around a lot on clips, back and forth. I'll cover a little bit of that in the next episode also, but this is mainly for corporate events where you're not triggering a lot of clips for audio syncing it with certain parts of the song for the chorus or the intro. And so, there may be cases for some shows where you're playing an intro and then you're going to, but usually you'll have those in line, and then you'll start column 1. You'll go to your, when the speaker walks out on stage, he's got a backdrop, you'll trigger that, or you can just fade it in with a fader also. So that's a little bit of the interface here. Let's see, what else can we go over here? There's the settings under preferences. There's, you can choose your audio for your output, your input. You can have your preview. So when you're previewing something, you can have it go to different channels. The buffer size, this is something that I've seen a lot. So say you have audio, like this clip. Let me just set this to loop real quick. This has a little bit of audio on it. This probably isn't a good one to test, but say your buffer size isn't correct and it's down, and you're going to start hearing, well, this is a good card, but you can hear like a stutter every once in a while in this card. I think if I use direct sound, it'll be a little bit more noticeable. So you can hear it right there. So if your playback is stuttering like that, this affects your input and your output. So this is the response time from your audio input and your output. So once you get it up to a good, usually by default when you select it, will go to where it thinks it wants to go, I believe. And there's differences between the way the Windows audio and the direct sound work, the way it's processed. I seem to be able to get better response coming out of Windows audio. There's drivers you can install to get better sound. The Mac side, the core audio system and the Macs are superior, I believe, to Windows. So there's pros and cons again to your Mac versus your PC. But I'm able to use both of them. I have audio reactive content that I've made that gets triggered off of input audio. So I've made these packs. If you haven't seen them, check them out. They're free. you can go to my website, cvhvisuals.com, and under footage here, you can click on footage, and there is a React Set 1. Download it. That will bring you to this set right here. And this is a different type of playback, generative content. So these were made only using a source. I started with a gradient color, and then these are just effects on top of a gradient. So you can see how, let me just put my input back to microphone. We'll select the channels for that. And you can see, let me get out of here. And if I turn up my gain, you can see how I made an audio EQ right there that captures audio analysis. The main thing that I used with this set is this reveal effect. And it's synced up to, a couple effects for external input audio. Here's another option here where this is, similar. I made a couple here. So these get triggered with a low end or a high end, whatever you choose. But you can create content straight from nothing, just using a gradient, a solid, and then adding effects onto it. Some systems will handle this differently than others. I've put this pack on an older MacBook, and I have to lock it to 30 frames per second because the card just can't handle it. The new MacBook Pro handles it very well. So it's going to depend on your system, how many effects you can use, and we will go over that more in another episode. I'm going to go over one more thing. We are going to go over how to sync your main and your backup. So I'm going to get two computers here. And I'm going to use NDI. So this should show two computers, correct. Okay, so I have a MacBook Pro, and I have my big rig right here. And I'm going to show you how to back up a redundancy system real quick here. I'm going to open up Arena on this computer. And this is through a protocol, OSC, Open Sound Control. So there's an option. Say you have your show set. It's ready to roll. There's no more changes, hopefully. And you're ready to rock and roll. You're ready to hit your first cue. So you can back up. It says it wants to save this composition first. Yeah, just save it. For my case, you can name it. It'll show you what it can't find, which is my logo I have somewhere. So you can collect this media. You can select where you want to collect it. You can put it onto a show drive. I'm going to put it here. You can label it as backup. Back up. Okay, and then I'm going to OK, and then go. Depending on how much content you have in your composition is how long it's going to take. It's usually fairly quick. This show, there's not a lot of content in here. There's a lot of effects, but I'm using this computer for other things at the moment also, so it's going to take a little longer. Depending on your drive speeds, this will affect the backup process also. Once it gets to 100%, we are going to go into that folder. Let's see, I think I put it on show 1. You'll see that it's already starting to collect media into this folder here. So it actually puts all your decks out for you. It will go into each deck. So all these React sets are generative content. There's not going to be anything in there for this. The webinar that I have running right now, so everything that was in that webinar deck is starting to load into this file. When this is done, it will also create a composition file here for you also. So what you do is you take this backup file folder, your root folder, put it onto your backup machine, and open up that composition file, and you will have an identical show to what you are running on your main. So your main and your backup will be identical. So once you have all that, let me just let this complete here really quick. This is at 99%. It's done. So you can see it added the name of the composition to a file, and then all your content is in subfolders for each deck. So just grab this folder, transfer it to your backup machine. So you have a main and a backup. Let's say they're both identical. So I have a MacBook Pro here and I have a PC. What you want to do is open up your preferences on your what you want to control the other one. So this is going to be my control version here, which is the PC. This will be my main. You go down under OSC, and I just want to output for now. I choose an IP address. I put the IP address of the other server that's on the network. It has to be on the same network and have a dedicated network for this. You'll get the best results. And your outgoing port number. So if I go over to the MacBook Pro now, and I go into input, which it's already selected, I have several Ethernet networks going onto this MacBook Pro. So this address is wrong. It's grabbing something else for NDI. If you go under your settings, and if you go to your network, it will show your IP address right here. So this 47 on the MacBook Pro, that's what I put over here, 47. So now, since I have that enabled, incoming port is 7000 because I'm going out. It's going out of here and into the MacBook Pro. So those two numbers have to match. So now, one more thing, you have to go up to View, or I'm sorry, Shortcuts, Edit OSC. And by default, you can output all OSC messages. This is useful if you want to control everything from one machine to the next, which I do not want to. I've come into something that when my timeline is linked from one Arena server and it seems like it's driving the next timeline. So that's something I don't want to use. I don't care about the timeline scrubbing back and forth. I don't care if I just want the main trigger to trigger both of them. So what you can do to, instead of outputting everything, you can create a new one. We'll name this as show. And I want to, you click on the layers, you want to output that. And then it gives you options. Only this layer or all layers. I want all the layers. So that way I don't have to click on all these and output them. I just clicked on the first layer, output all layers. Same thing with clip. I want to output the clip. I want to output all clips in the composition. So every clip that I clip on here, I want to be able to trigger on the backup machine. I usually do the master. We'll output the master. Same thing with the columns. We'll output all columns. Same thing. I don't think I need to do that because this is a master column here. And usually, your masters, you'll do your masters and audio if you want to use your faders as well. That way everything, so we do all layers, all audio for all layers, and all the video for all the layers. So now, when you turn off your editing mode, whatever I click on one computer, let me just turn this off here, you will see that it's triggering both of them at the same time. So let me just turn down the transition mode between these two here so we can see how well these do sync. Let me just turn this one down here also. There's going to be a millisecond delay, even if you're going direct. It's nothing the human eye can see. So if I'm triggering through these, you can see these are triggering identically to the human eye. So this works really well. I forgot to put my kill on here, but yeah. So I have these layers. Let me just turn these off over here. So let's trigger this clip here. So this is a time code. I've got a 1 hour time code here. I put a freeze on it. So if I freeze it, let's link it first. Let's go down here, freeze. I want to output that option. Just say all layers. Let me make sure that effect is on this side. Okay, it's there. So when I trigger this and I freeze it, you'll see, I mean, they're pretty close. They both stop and they were both triggered at the same time. So 0.6, you know, is pretty close. This is useful. You see, it's under a millisecond off. So that one says 22. This one's 21. So if I freeze it again, so it's under a millisecond off. This is useful if you are running out of outputs, you don't have data paths, or you have more outputs that you need to go to another room and you want them triggered at the same time, but you want to use a different machine to trigger those outputs. You can trigger, you can have one machine trigger multiple machines. I've done up to 6 machines where I've triggered a lot of outputs across different machines. You can use it for multiple outputs, but I would not use it for blends. So I would not blend these two computers together to make one image. That is where that triggering latency is going to come in. You're going to get a little bit of tearing between the two computers. If they're separate screens and there's a border around the screens, feel free to use that. That's something I use. And that's one way to have a MIDI controller trigger 2 machines also. So whatever you MIDI into your main server is going to go onto your backup also. It's going to control it. So if I go in here and I trigger with my MIDI, you can see it restarts that clip. And it just, they're it's triggering both of them. It's synced. So that's, I hope I covered a majority of everything I can within these 2 hours here. I said 20 minutes. I went 5 minutes over that. I'll answer some questions. And we'll see, if there's anything you guys want to ask. Let me put the chat up here. Let's see. Let's go over to here. This is top chat. Let's see. How can you capture the SMPTE signal? That's a good question. You use it by going into your audio preferences. Your audio input device will come from your audio output device. No, these are independent. I'm sorry. I'm using the same one because they're both on this. I'm using a Mackie mixer, so they're both coming out of the same thing. So this will be your input device. You can have separate as your output device. So your input you would choose your frame rate, and then you choose what channel. You have 2 options now for SMPTE. So you can choose channel 1, which would be like a left and a right. You have 2 channels, and then you would go to your clip, and you would choose SMPTE 1. So whatever is coming down this line, this channel 1 from this input device. Some devices have 2 inputs. So you can choose a channel for the second, and you can have 2 different triggers coming. So if you have 2 separate signals coming into the machine, you can set 2 different sources, 1 for each clip. So I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know. Let's see. Tell me how to make a group layer. I think I went over that. That was just right-clicking on the group and then going to new. And then you can, if you have more groups, you can click on something that's outside of a group and input it into a group really quick. So that'll put it into the group for you. So let's go back to none. It'll take it back out. That was the wrong layer, but that's okay. Which is better for corporate conference? Resolume, high render, mag image, RGB link media server. They're all, like I said, everything has its pros and cons. Some have basic functionality. Resolume is my content driver. I can move my elements around on the screen. My final output is usually a Barco system, analog way system. You can use RGB link. The S3s, the E2s are more common for me. And then the iMags usually go into the E2 to eliminate the latency. So if it's important that the lip sync links up with your speaker, which in all corporate events it is, you want your iMag going straight into the last source, which is your switcher, which is coming out to the projectors or LED wall. Yes, this will stay on YouTube. This will be archived. On Res 7, enabling spout is killing me, frames per second. You ever heard of this issue? Yes, this can be an issue. Spout uses your GPU, it's texture sharing. So depending on your graphics card, there could be a lot of variables. There could be something that's the bandwidth, that's communicating between your GPU and your CPU. If it's bottlenecking, that could be an issue. If your graphics card's just not up to the challenge, that's an issue. To overcome some of that, you can reduce your composition size. So instead of sending, say, like a 1080 output, go make your composition size as 720. And then you can output that 720 to 1080. You're going to lose a little bit of quality, and then just scale it up on your final output. So just stretch it to the 1080. It'll make your CPU a little bit more efficient. You'll get better frame rate, but it could be other things as far as your frames per second or something also. OS Sync works with Autopilot on the main. I do not believe so, but if you have I'm not sure. I rarely use output all OSC messages. I try to eliminate a lot of traffic going through the network. If you have a backup system that is identical to your main, as soon as you trigger that first clip, both systems are going to be set to autopilot because it's an identical system. So if you trigger that first clip, the timing should be identical, and it should just keep in sync, pretty close in sync. I've never seen a trail go off. I've seen audio trail off of a video clip because of that buffer size that I showed you in the audio preferences. So if you go to the buffer size and it's not glitching, you should get smooth playback. The timing should be correct. I've had corrupt files given to me, last minute corrupt files, and, audio is messed up with whatever format and codec they gave to me. And sometimes I try to play MP4s in Arena, and that's where that i9 processor helps a little bit, H.264s, but always use DXV3. I like to convert everything myself because I don't know what a lot of these content creators are not familiar with the codec or ALI even to convert. So I like to do it myself. I say, give me MP4s or give me as high as resolution as you can, uncompressed so the quality looks great, and then I compress it on my own. So that should help. What DP to DisplayPort to HDMI converters do you use? Okay, I don't go DisplayPort to HDMI. I do go DisplayPort to HDMI. DisplayPort, to HDMI. What I've purchased in the past are inexpensive. Let me give you the exact brand that I've had success with. Let's see. Let's go to DisplayPort. Let's just go on my search history here. This right here, pluggable. These are active. These work well. They're not super expensive. 26 US, 27 US dollars. DisplayPort. So if you get 3 of these coming out of, they're all make sure you have all identical if you want to keep your sync. If you want to keep your screen synced. I've used 3 of these on an LED screen, and going into an E2, and no problem, no sync issues. These are capable of doing 3840 by 2160 at 60. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get higher resolutions. Make sure whatever you're looking at will support it. This will do 1080 at 120 also. So just try to. Let me just put that over on the screen here for you. Sorry, I thought I had that up. Let me get this up here, and there we go. So that's the one that I usually use there. So it's pluggable, active, DisplayPort, HDMI adapter. So, all right. Let's go on to some more questions here. Let me get you back up on screen. What would you like to see improved in Resolume first? Bart. Hello, Bart. This question is going to get you in trouble. I am happy with Resolume. If you ask that publicly, everyone's going to give you a wish list, and they're going to say, "I wish you could do this. I wish you could do that." I wish everything is working for me very nicely. It's constantly being improved upon. It's stable. I would like to see the progression continue with some of this later hardware that's coming out, such as these RTX cards. I'm a big user of Touch Designer, and I can use the RTX cards have a ray tracing capability, so I can use that technology out of some software, and I would like to be able to use that all out of one media server would be great, so I could put a 3D model or something into Arena, even if it's like a separate add-on plugin or something, something that not everyone's going to use, but some people would like to use or people would start using. So I would like to put a 3D model in there and, add some real-time reflections and shadow effects onto to the model. I could texture the 3D model. So that's how I'm thinking of future use. I'm sure you guys are getting there. I've seen teasers on Instagram about 3D models a while ago, so I don't know if that's in the plans or if that was just internal testing. But I would love to see that. So that's a good question. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Let's see. I'm going to try and keep up with everyone's questions here. How do you blend 8 monitors using 2 FX4s since you see only one extended monitor in the PC? Or will the second FX4 do a duplicate of the first? Okay, so yeah, so when you have your 2 8Ks coming out of, let me see if I can find an old shot here. It's going to come out as an 8K resolution, and it's going to be 7680 by 2160. So let me see if I can find a Windows property here. I found it. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. This computer was running a 4K resolution interface and 2 8K outputs. So what this is here is two 4K outputs. So that FX4 sees, it depends on how you configure the FX4 with the software. You can have the FX4 as 4 screens going across. So it's 1080, 1080, 1080, 1080, in a straight line, or you can have them as a quad. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you would grab your input slices off of those sections and then just route them to your output. So you would have to, this is one screen, but it's 2 FX4s. So it would either be split down the middle or this cross, which would be, horizontally here. So it would go from top to bottom. So that'll be your complete raster. And then within Arena, you would just grab for each slice, grab each section here, and then your output's going to match the same shape and whatever your output resolution is. If it's in a straight line, it'll show 7680 by 1080, and then just line up those slices one after each other. So you can assign your inputs to your outputs that way. So I hope that helps. Bart's got the zipper. Nice. Encouraging. Hope I didn't share too much. There's a bunch of questions from Facebook Live. Okay, let me see. I'm just looking at I've been viewing the YouTube feed. YouTube's superior to Facebook Live. I was a little reluctant about streaming to Facebook because I had issues on my test. There's a lot of need for bandwidth right now around the world, and it did not go well with me. So I kind of neglected you guys. Sorry. Let me see what you guys have some questions. I'll take a couple from Facebook here. Okay, so I don't have it to be able to put up on the screen, but here's a question from Antoine. Using the Blackmagic Decklink 8 in and out, do you use the output for setup that doesn't require the signal to be frame synced, or it's just not usable? If you're using 2 cards for outputting, say your main GUI is on your RTX card or your GTX card, your 2080 or 1080 Ti or 1060, whatever you have, and you have Decklink and you're trying to output from that card, you're not going to be in sync. It'll be close. You might take a performance hit depending on your machine also. The way I found Arena to work is it renders on the GUI card, so whatever your main interface is on is what it will render your outputs from that card. So if you're using 2 cards, I've never been able to have a smooth system, no matter what component and configuration I've done. I've seen posts where people say, yeah, I run 2 cards flawlessly, smooth as butter. I have been unable to get that with 2 cards. The way it's working is that one card is going to your CPU and then it's going back to the other card. So it's constantly going back and forth like this. So there's processing going on with the CPU. So I don't think that you can get smooth playback from that. I've even tried it from MadMapper, which they say they support dual cards. And I still see, I'm a pixel peeper, so I look at every frame. Like I said, I like 120 hertz, 120 frames. I try to get everything as smooth as possible. I like that surreal look. I'm not a fan of that cinematic look where I like everything to be nice and smooth, but I think that, from my point of view, some clients aren't going to notice. Some people aren't going to notice until you say something. But I notice it. I'm not happy with it, so I don't recommend it using dual cards. That's why I recommend the FX4 or any other type of distributor card. There's another one, I think, from Lindy. Matrix just came out with another one also, so I'm curious to try a couple of those to see how they perform. Can we sync outputs of 2 or more RTX 2080s in the same machine? Would you suggest? No. That's the same situation as unfortunately the non-Quadro cards you cannot sync. There's not an option to put a sync card inside the machine. So if you have, that's when you need Quadro cards. Quadro cards are more expensive, and to get something that's comparable to a 2080 Ti out of Quadro, you're going to be spending, $6,000 on a single card, and then you need to buy a sync card. And if you need 2 of them, you're $12,000. You're over $12,000 in the graphics cards right there. So that's why I go the Datapath route, or whatever kind of distribution you can go with. So unfortunately, today you cannot sync 2080 Ti's, 2080s. It would have to be a Quadro card. Let me take a couple more from Facebook here. I have a variable sync problem with tearing. Okay. That is an issue that I do see a lot, posts on forums. I see that, I hear it, and then I ask what kind of configuration do you have? And then they'll say that I'm using HDMI and DisplayPort to try and make one screen. So HDMI and DisplayPort are 2 different types of connectors and transmission. They offer different transmission modes, bandwidth. So it's going to be hard to sync, even if it's coming out of the same graphics card. Like I was saying, the 2080 Ti has a HDMI. Some of them have 2 HDMIs and 2 display ports. I opt for the Founders Edition card from NVIDIA, which has 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. So as long as you use, 3 display ports to make one screen, you're not going to have any tearing issues. So that's a good question. Thank you. Just started NDI. It is great, super easy and pretty stable. Yes, I totally agree. I had someone come into a venue recently for a concert, and he wanted me to use a capture card. And I suggested NDI, and he was set on capture card. He said he had nothing but issues with NDI. I tried to reassure him. In the long run, we ended up using NDI. It's less latency depending on your resolution. You're going to have a little bit more compression. You're not going to see it most of the time unless you scale something up extremely large to like 300%. Even if you get to 200%, you're going to start, losing quality. So anything over 100, you're going to start losing quality. But we ended up using NDI, and the guy at the end was like, "Wow, man, that was super stable. I didn't think it was that stable." And he was sending me a 4K output from a Razer laptop into the venue's main media server. So that it worked out pretty well. Yeah, I agree. It's very stable. Best way you sync the LED light Resolume visuals? Good question. Let's go back over to this MacBook. Let me see if I can find a photo. For instance, the University of Miami. Here's a lighting controller. So I made this lighting controller. I have a website saved somewhere. I will put it in the description of this YouTube video. I'll put it on Facebook also. It shows you a wide variety of ArtNet controllers. This is something that I built. I bought the controller and bought the power supply and bought a housing, put everything on a mount, and I ran all the data lines out to the LEDs in the hallway is where all the lighting was. it goes from Ethernet into this controller. It might be hard to see. Let me open this up inside of Preview and see if we can zoom this in here. Okay. Yep. All right, so you can see the Ethernet ports here. This is ArtNet. So when I suggest running ArtNet from a separate Ethernet controller, whether it be USB 3 Ethernet 1 gig adapters work. I use them. They work. Never had an issue. Some motherboards have dual Ethernet ports, so you can have dual LAN connections. Use one separate than if you're using one for internet-based sources. You know, like say for updates or remoting into the system. Ethernet from the adapter to this controller works very well. That eliminates a lot of the traffic on the network, so it's dedicated. I don't have issues syncing them. As long as they're all on the same controller, you shouldn't have any sync issues. This controller is controlling the sync coming out. There's software that comes with this controller. This is the Advatech controller, and it does 32 universes. So you can double up on each one of these ports. You can have 32 universes of ArtNet control here. You can even do DMX on this controller. There's a lot of options in the software to where you can configure this controller, such as frame rate, refresh rate, and then there's options on Arena. Once you have a Lumiverse put into your output, you can choose a frame rate also. I think it goes up to 40 frames per second is what you can send out through ArtNet. So that's a good question. Thank you. Okay, so I'm having an issue running my NVIDIA 2080 Ti through MacBook Pro using the Windows side, of course. Yes. Okay, so this is from Facebook, from Carlos. Yes. I don't suggest it. I've had success with it. There's a reason why I'm using AMD with my MacBook now. It's because it's less headache. If I wanted to use an eGPU with Windows, I would get a laptop that supported eGPU, such as Razer, and use it that way. I've had issues also recently with the recent updates to the operating system, Windows. I think 1903, 1909 is what I'm running now. It has some issues, even for AMD with the eGPUs. So that might be part of the issue. I have not tried the 2080 Ti recently on the MacBook Pro. Keep in mind that the MacBook Pros, they recommend, depending on the model, to use the left ports for USB-C for your Thunderbolt 3. The left ports, they give you 16 lanes for data. A lot of these eGPUs are 2 lanes. They'll have 2 lanes of traffic. The Razer Core V2 that I use offers 4 lanes. So if you're using the left side, you got 16. You got the 16 PCI, and you have the Razer Core V2. In my instance, you're going to get better performance than if it was a 2-lane eGPU, which would bottleneck the card a little bit more. So in that case, if you had a 2-lane, it might even not even be utilizing your 2080 Ti to its max capability. I would do some research, run some benchmarks on your eGPU. There is something I can show you real quick that might help you to see if you're getting full output. If you go into applications, I have something called, I don't know what is it called, Geekbench. This will show you, I have the trial version here. This will let you choose, I want to see this AMD card, not the internal, but the 5700. I want to see my results if this thing's, what it benchmarks with this setup. So it'll run the test, it'll open up a web browser with the trial version, and it'll give you, you can compare it to what others are seeing also. AMD's not fully optimized for OS X yet. I believe this 5700 XT isn't, at least, but I'm getting great results. It's just not running as good as it could on a Windows machine, but I'll take the performance increasement. Let me see here. Let me grab a couple questions from YouTube. Curious if you had that problem with alpha over NDI. Okay, let me see. You might have a preview question. I've had an issue with NDI coming out of Resolume sending really shitty 16-bit alpha. It's set to 16-bit and it shows it is coming in properly in Touch Designer. Spout looks correct, but NDI doesn't. So it looks proper in Touch Designer. Spout looks proper in Touch Designer, but NDI doesn't. So it's coming the same thing with Touch Designer. Make sure you have the latest tool set installed. Sometimes there's a newer version of the compression codec. It's NDI HX version 4.5 is the latest. Check that out first. I've never had an issue with alpha channels in NDI, except for After Effects, like I showed you guys earlier. So After Effects doesn't accept alpha on the latest build right now. That's something that Adobe needs to address. But no, I haven't seen that. There's a monitor also that comes with the toolkit, the tool set for NDI, so you can open up a monitor and send it to that monitor also, so you see if that software, if it's coming in correctly or not. Spout has other settings for, if you install Spout separately, you have a control panel where you can control some of the settings for that also. Spout looks good, NDI doesn't. So yeah, check your NDI installer, make sure you have the latest. 4.5 just came out recently, but I haven't seen any issues with that, and I've been using it for a long time through the versions. So, try to send me a private message, and maybe I can help you with that later. We can try to figure that out. Does it need to be installed separately from Resolume? No, it doesn't. Resolume incorporated HX into their latest version. So that's only if you want the additional tools like the plugins for Adobe. There's a scan converter that it installs, so you can grab different applications from your machines. So it's the same. 4.5 is the same driver for NDI, though. I believe they're on version 1. So that I believe that's what Resolume's using. They're using HX because my HX NDI app on my phone works now with it. So that should be pretty good. So I hope that helps. Send me a message. We can try to figure that out, man. Thanks a lot for the webinar. No problem. I wanted to share as much as I could. I am going up to 2 hours and 40 minutes now. There's a lot more that can be covered. If you go to, let me just bring you back over to this machine real quick. There's so much more that can be covered that I didn't touch on. That's why I said I might do another episode for content creation. I might get into the interface a little bit more. Go to Resolume's website. There is a training tab right here. If you click on it, there is a ton of videos. There's the basics. you know, and they go over the outputs, how to apply effects. They get into compositing, you know, alignment, transformation, generative content, symmetry, which is very important for a lot of live events. You know, you want your show to look, you know, your composition to look great across the whole screen. You know, it makes the room look better. And then they get into color, rhythm, you know, video playback, performance. So these guys have a lot of information. I myself haven't even checked out all these, but I do have time now. And like I said, I can always learn something. I learn something every show almost. If it's with Resolume or with something else, every show I'm learning something from someone else and I'm sharing, and that's making the shows look better. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. I hope this helps everyone. I want the shows to look nice. If you have any questions and I can help you out, let me know. If you know, if you need help with the show, let me know. We can figure something out together. You know, so it's a community that we all have. That you know, I'm not the guy that this is my CPU. I'm not going to show you how I built it because I don't want you to have business. You know, I'm not like that. I feel if you know your stuff, you're going to get the work no matter what. So there's lots of work to go around. I know we're on some downtime right now, unfortunately. Keep your head up, learn what you can right now. There's going to be a need for events. You know, I don't want to speculate on a time, how long it's going to be. You know, I'm hoping no more than 3 months. A lot of my clients are postponing; they're not canceling. So these clients, depending on your clients, they want to get, you know, they have product launches. They're always, you know, they have annual events. So it's something that's always going to happen. We're in a good industry. We're in a little bit of downtime right now, but you know, I have high hopes to where this is just gonna turn around again, and we're all gonna be happy, you know. So keep your heads up. You know, this will blow over. We'll get this under control. I'm not worried. Let me get a couple more from YouTube, and then I'm gonna probably end the session here after a couple more. So you guys can always reach out to me. I have time right now to answer questions outside of this webinar. I'm here to help. Does looping FX4 work as the same as hooking up the FX4 to independent display ports? Yes and no. So the resolution is going to be the same. So if you're doing 2 display ports, the advantage to that is you're sending 4K at 60 to each FX4. If you loop a data path to another data path, the limitation, the graphics cards can handle 8K at 60, the RTX cards. The GTX cards, the 1080s and TIs, they can handle 8K at 30. Unfortunately, Datapath FX4s can only do 8K at 30 inputs. So it's an 8K by 8K. And that's not a show killer. You can run 30 hertz. Your outputs can still be set to 60 hertz. So each output from your FX4 can be 1080 at 60. It's just that overall input will go. You're not going to be stuttering or anything. It's just a limitation with that size resolution. It's a trade-off that you have to give for running that many outputs. If you need 24 outputs or something, if you have available outputs, run them individually to the FX4s. Let's see. If you make a shape or square, add a bit of blur to it, and send it over Spout and NDI, you can see the problem. Oh, this is from Vincent again. Okay. So yeah, I'll try that. I'll see if I can try to replicate something. The quality wise, I notice there's a little bit of a color difference maybe. That's due to the compression, but I'll check it out and I'll look into it. All right, recommend PTZ cams with NDI with controllers in Resolume, or do you input via SDI with a controller separate from Resolume? I've used NDI straight into Resolume from PTZ cameras. I prefer a controller on a camera. The PTZ parameters will show up in Resolume, and you can link your MIDI controllers or faders to those parameters and control the camera. I prefer a separate controller, like a Panasonic controller or something. I like the ability for just the hardware layout alone. Just having a hardware that's dedicated for a controller. You have your presets, your joystick, basically, to where you can control your camera. So that's my preferred method. But if you're on a tight budget, or if you don't have access to a controller, you can control them from Arena. I've built a controller in Touch Designer before, just for PTZ cameras in the past. Not necessary now. You guys are welcome. I hope I covered as much as I could. I just want to touch again on, keep your heads up. Keep, don't get down. It's hard times for a lot of people. So learn as much as you can. Try to have a routine every day also, like you're going to work. That will keep you motivated and will keep your headspace right, so you can, when the time comes to go back into a show, you're going to be ready. You're going to have a lot of knowledge. You're going to have a lot of new techniques to provide clients, to show off. I like to go to shows and show off. Look what I can do. Look what I learned how to do. And then people are like, you get the wows. I like, the biggest thing for me out of a show is when people go, wow. They walk into a room and they're like, wow, look at this room. Look at all this display and the projection. And, so I've been fortunate enough to work with some great clients that appreciate that also. So I've been given the opportunity, and that's going to come back. We're all on downtime right now. If you want to start pushing web streaming, I suggest it. I haven't seen anything mind-blowing out there, but with Arena, you can really do some great content going out to the web. And it's as easy as sending NDI over to your streaming software. OBS, I recommend. It's a free software. OBS will let you output to a majority of the streaming providers. You can do custom RTMP server also. But look up OBS. I use it also without streaming, just for capturing NDI from different softwares on a computer. It's for Mac and PC. I think it might be for Linux also. Don't quote me on that, but it might be. So I appreciate everyone joining me. I hope that you've learned a lot from this. Send me messages. If you have any questions outside of this, send me, if you just want to talk to me, send me a message. Go to my website. You have my email address. My Facebook page has contact information on it. Send me a direct message or whatnot. I have time to communicate and help everyone out right now. So thank you all for joining me. And I'm going to end the session. So let me just make sure I save this for everyone. And I'm going to let you listen to an inspiring song with our current situation in the world right now.
together.